A devoted golden retriever waits patiently at a train station every single day, his eyes searching for his owner. But what heartbreaking tragedy keeps him there? His unshakable love will capture your heart, and the truth behind his wait will leave you in tears. Stay tuned for this unforgettable and emotional story. Before we dive in, let me know in the comments, where are you watching from? I'd love to hear from you. Let's dive in. At the heart of a bustling town, a man named John lived a simple yet fulfilling life. In his early 30s, John was known for his quiet kindness and unassuming demeanor. Though he worked a mundane office job, his love for life was unmatched. However, there was one thing missing: a loyal companion to share his days. That all changed one rainy evening. While walking home, John noticed a skinny, mud-covered golden retriever huddled beneath a park bench. The dog's fur was matted, and his eyes held a mixture of fear and longing. Without hesitation, John knelt beside the trembling creature. "Hey, buddy," he whispered softly, extending his hand. The dog hesitated, sniffed the air, and then took a cautious step forward. That was the beginning of a friendship that would redefine loyalty. John named the dog Buddy. In the weeks that followed, Buddy transformed from a timid stray into a joyful, energetic companion. John's small apartment now felt alive with Buddy's presence. They would spend evenings playing fetch in the park, share quiet mornings with a warm cup of coffee and a wagging tail, and find solace in each other's company. But their favorite routine began every weekday morning. John would leave for work by train, and Buddy would accompany him to the station, trotting happily by his side. As the train approached, John would kneel down, stroke Buddy's head, and say, "Stay here, Buddy. I'll be back soon." The dog would obediently sit by the platform, watching as John boarded the train. When the train disappeared from view, Buddy would settle himself near the station entrance, waiting patiently for John to return in the evening. This routine became a heartwarming sight for the station's regular commuters. They would see Buddy wagging his tail eagerly every time the train doors opened, his eyes scanning the crowd for John's familiar face. "That's loyalty," one man said, smiling as he passed by. But one day, the rhythm of their routine shattered. It began like any other morning. John and Buddy walked to the station together, the crisp autumn air carrying the scent of fallen leaves. John patted Buddy on the head as usual. "Stay here, Buddy. I'll be back soon," he said with a reassuring smile before stepping onto the train. Only, John never returned. Buddy waited as always, his eyes fixed on every train that arrived. The hours passed, but there was no sign of John. Evening turned to night, and commuters began to notice the dog's confusion. "Where's his owner?" someone murmured. A kind elderly woman offered Buddy a sandwich, but he barely touched it, his gaze still fixed on the empty platform. Days turned into weeks, and Buddy's unwavering wait became a poignant story at the station. People brought him food and blankets, but he refused to move far from his spot. His eyes remained hopeful, searching the crowds for the man who had promised to come back. Meanwhile, John's family was plunged into panic. A phone call from the hospital delivered the devastating news. John had been in a severe accident. The details were scarce, but the impact of the call was immediate. As the scene shifted to John's family anxiously gathering at the hospital, one question hung heavily in the air. Would John ever return to the loyal friend waiting for him? The train station was always a bustling place, filled with the chatter of travelers and the steady rhythm of trains pulling in and out. Yet, amid the noise and movement, Buddy remained a quiet, steadfast figure. Each morning, as the first rays of sunlight filtered through the station windows, he would take his usual spot near the platform. His golden fur, now slightly dull from the passing days, caught the attention of commuters who had grown used to his presence. Buddy's routine was unshakable. Every time a train arrived, his ears would perk up and his tail would wag with hopeful enthusiasm. He would rise to his feet, his eyes scanning the faces pouring out of the train cars. But when John's familiar figure didn't appear, his tail would drop and he would settle back down, his gaze fixed on the tracks as if willing the next train to bring his best friend back. Days turned into weeks, but Buddy's determination never wavered. His routine became a symbol of loyalty, drawing the attention of those who passed through the station. One of them was a little girl named Emily. She was about 8 years old, with a bright smile and a curious nature. Every morning, on her way to school, she noticed Buddy sitting alone. One day, she couldn't resist approaching him. "Hi, doggy," Emily said softly, crouching down a few feet away. Buddy looked up, his amber eyes filled with a mix of curiosity and sadness. Emily reached into her backpack and pulled out a small sandwich. "Here, you must be hungry." At first, Buddy hesitated, but hunger eventually won out. He took the sandwich gently from her hand, his tail wagging faintly. From that day on, Emily made it a point to stop by the station daily to feed him. The bond between the little girl and the loyal dog grew, and she started calling him Buddy after overhearing some commuters use the name. As Emily continued to care for him, Buddy's unwavering hope became even more evident. She noticed how he sprang to life every time a train pulled into the station, his tail wagging furiously and his eyes shining with anticipation. But each time the crowd dispersed without John, Buddy's heartbreak was palpable. Emily couldn't understand why Buddy was so determined to stay. One evening, Emily's father, who often picked her up from the station, told her the story he'd heard about Buddy. They say his owner used to take the train every day, and Buddy would wait here for him to come back, he explained. But one day, the man never returned. Poor dog's been waiting ever since. That night, Emily couldn't stop thinking about Buddy's loyalty. She wondered about his owner. What had happened to him? Meanwhile, Buddy's memories of John played in his mind like a reel of cherished moments. He remembered the way John would scratch behind his ears and call him the best boy in the world. He thought of the walks in the park, the lazy Sundays on the couch, and the countless mornings spent walking to the station together. Buddy's loyalty was deeply rooted in those memories, and he couldn't abandon the place where they had shared their last moments together. Unbeknownst to Buddy, John had been in a terrible accident on his way to work that fateful morning. The impact had left him unconscious, and he was rushed to a hospital far from the city. The severity of his injuries had kept him from returning, and his family was left grappling with the uncertainty of his condition. One day, as Emily was feeding Buddy, she overheard two station workers talking nearby. "Remember that man who never came back? They say he was in a bad accident," one of them said. Emily froze, her eyes wide. What if it's Buddy's owner, she thought, her heart racing. She looked at Buddy, who was sitting quietly, his eyes fixed on the tracks as usual. Emily knew she had to find out more. Buddy's unwavering presence at the train station began to feel like more than just a passing story for the daily commuters. It became a symbol of love, loyalty, and hope. Over time, nearly everyone who passed through the station couldn't help but notice the golden retriever sitting near the platform, his eyes scanning the arriving passengers with quiet determination. It started with small acts of kindness. A woman working at the coffee kiosk began leaving a bowl of fresh water out for Buddy. A group of college students who took the morning train started pooling their pocket money to buy him treats. Emily, of course, remained his most loyal companion, visiting him every day without fail. Soon, people began sharing Buddy's story online. A young commuter posted a photo of Buddy on social media with the caption, "This dog has been waiting for his owner at the train station for weeks. His loyalty is unmatched. Does anyone know his story?" The post quickly gained traction, with hundreds of people commenting and sharing. One evening, a local journalist named Sarah came across the post. Intrigued, she decided to visit the station to see Buddy for herself. When she arrived, she was struck by the sight of the patient dog sitting quietly by the platform, his gaze filled with a mix of hope and sadness. Sarah approached Emily, who was feeding Buddy a sandwich. "Hi, I'm Sarah, a journalist. I heard about this dog and wanted to learn more. Do you know anything about him?" Sarah asked gently. Emily nodded. "His name's Buddy. Everyone says he's waiting for his owner, but no one knows where he is. I think something bad happened to him," she said, her voice tinged with concern. Moved by the story, Sarah decided to write an article about Buddy, calling him the most loyal dog. The piece was published in the local newspaper and quickly became the talk of the town. Soon, people from nearby neighborhoods and even other cities started visiting the station to see Buddy and offer their support. One day, an old man with a weathered face and a cane approached Buddy. He stood quietly for a moment, observing the dog. Then, he turned to the small crowd that had gathered nearby. "I knew a man who used to come here every day with a dog just like this," the man said, his voice gravelly but clear. "His name was John. He always stopped to chat with me before catching his train. I haven't seen him in a long time. What happened to him?" Emily's eyes lit up. "You knew John? That's Buddy's owner," she exclaimed. The old man nodded. "If he hasn't come back, maybe something happened to him on the train. I can help you find out more." Encouraged by this lead, Emily and the old man approached the station master to see if he remembered anything about John. At first, the station master seemed reluctant, but when he heard Buddy's story, he softened. "I do remember him," the station master said. "He always took the same train every morning. Come to think of it, after that day, we found something he left behind in the station office." The station master disappeared into his office and returned holding a small, worn wallet. This was in the lost and found. "I didn't know who it belonged to at the time, but it matches the description of the man you're talking about." Emily's heart raced as she took the wallet. Inside, she found a few crumpled bills, an old train ticket, and a faded photograph. The picture showed John and Buddy sitting together in a park, both of them smiling. Buddy's fur looked shinier back then, and John's face radiated happiness. Emily stared at the photograph, her mind racing. "This is him. This is Buddy's owner. But where is he now?" she whispered. The old man leaned in to examine the photo. "I've seen him carrying this wallet before. Maybe this picture can lead us to someone who knows what happened to him," he said. As Emily clutched the wallet tightly, she felt a glimmer of hope. Could this be the key to finding John and reuniting him with Buddy? Emily couldn't stop staring at the faded photograph of John and Buddy. The warmth and joy in John's smile mirrored the love and loyalty Buddy displayed every day at the station. She knew they had to dig deeper, and she wasn't about to give up now. The old man, who introduced himself as Walter, offered to guide Emily and Sarah, the journalist, through the next steps. If John's wallet was left here, that means he never got far. Something must have happened to him after he left the station, Walter said thoughtfully. Sarah decided to use her journalist instincts to track down leads. She spent hours making calls to local train authorities, hospitals, and police stations to gather any information about incidents that might have occurred on the day of John's disappearance. Meanwhile, Emily and Walter combed through the station, asking longtime employees and regular commuters if they remembered anything unusual. It was Sarah who hit the first breakthrough. Late one evening, she called Emily with news. "I spoke to someone who works for the railway. They mentioned a report about a man who was severely injured after falling from a moving train on the day John disappeared. He was rushed to a hospital far from here because it was the closest facility that could handle critical cases," Sarah explained. Emily's heart skipped a beat. "So John's alive? But why hasn't he come back?" she asked, her voice trembling with hope and confusion. The next morning, Emily, Walter, and Sarah visited the hospital mentioned in the report. It was a large, slightly run-down facility, about 50 miles away from the train station. Inside, the air smelled of antiseptic, and the corridors bustled with nurses and doctors moving swiftly between patients. After explaining their story to the receptionist, they were directed to an older nurse named Karen who had worked there for decades. Karen listened intently as they recounted Buddy's loyalty and John's disappearance. "I do remember a man fitting that description," Karen said thoughtfully. "He came in months ago unconscious and in critical condition. He didn't have any identification, except a train ticket and a few personal items. He was in bad shape. Broken ribs, a head injury. It was a miracle he survived. Emily leaned forward eagerly. What happened to him? Is he still here? Karen shook her head. He was discharged a while ago, but there's something you should know. His recovery was very slow, and he suffered memory loss from the head trauma. He couldn't recall certain events from his life, including how he got injured or where he was going that day. He didn't mention a dog either. It's possible he doesn't even remember Buddy. The room fell silent as the weight of Karen's words sank in. Emily glanced at the photograph of John and Buddy, her heart breaking at the thought of John forgetting the very companion who hadn't forgotten him. "Do you know where he went after he was discharged?" Sarah asked, breaking the silence. Karen thought for a moment before responding. "We tried to locate his family, but we didn't have much to go on. A social worker helped arrange for him to stay at a rehabilitation center a few towns over. That was the last I heard about him. I can give you the name of the center, but I can't guarantee he's still there." Walter placed a comforting hand on Emily's shoulder. "It's a lead, kid. We've come this far. We can't stop now." Emily nodded, her determination renewed. She looked down at Buddy, who sat patiently at her feet, as if sensing that they were getting closer to finding John. "We'll find him, Buddy. I promise," she whispered. Karen handed him the name and address of the rehabilitation center, her expression warm but cautious. "I hope you find him," she said, "and I hope he remembers." As they left the hospital, Emily couldn't shake the mix of hope and uncertainty swirling in her chest. They were one step closer to finding John, but what if his memory loss meant he no longer recognized Buddy? The train ride to the small town where the rehabilitation center was located felt like an eternity. Emily sat by the window, clutching Buddy's leash tightly. The golden retriever rested his head on her lap, his soft brown eyes gazing out at the passing fields and towns. It was as if he knew this journey was for him, that every mile brought him closer to the person he had been waiting for all these years. "You ready for this, Buddy?" Emily whispered, stroking his fur. Buddy let out a soft whine and wagged his tail slightly, his unspoken answer full of hope and determination. When they arrived at the rehabilitation center, the building's modest exterior didn't betray the importance of what it might hold inside. Emily, accompanied by Walter and Sarah, walked in with Buddy by her side. The receptionist, a kind woman in her 40s, greeted them warmly. "We're looking for someone who might be staying here," Emily explained. "His name is John. He was transferred here after recovering from an accident." "Is he still here?" The receptionist scanned her computer and nodded. "Yes, John is here. He's staying in one of our cottages nearby. I can take you to him." Emily's heart raced as she followed the receptionist down a winding path that led to a cluster of small, charming cottages surrounded by gardens. Buddy walked beside her, his ears perked up, his tail wagging slightly as if he could sense something familiar. When they reached the cottage, the receptionist knocked gently on the door. Moments later, it opened and a man stepped out. His face was thinner than the one in the photograph, and his hair was streaked with gray. But his kind eyes held the same warmth that Emily had seen in the picture. "John," the receptionist said with a smile, "you have some visitors." John looked at Emily and the others, his brow furrowing in confusion. "I'm sorry, do I know you?" he asked hesitantly. Before Emily could speak, Buddy broke free from her grasp and bounded toward John. His tail wagged furiously, and he let out a joyful bark. He stopped just short of John and looked up at him, his golden eyes filled with recognition and love. John took a step back, startled. What's going on?" he stammered, his gaze shifting between Buddy and the group. "That's Buddy," Emily said softly. "Your dog. He's been waiting for you at the train station for 10 years. John blinked, his expression a mixture of disbelief and confusion. I don't remember," he said, shaking his head. Buddy, undeterred, inched closer to John and sat down at his feet. Then, slowly and deliberately, he raised his paw and placed it on John's hand. The gesture was so familiar, so natural, that John froze. His eyes widened and his hand trembled as he stared down at Buddy. Flashes of memories, faint and fragmented, began to surface. Playing fetch in the park, long walks by the river, Buddy's excited barks when he came home from work. "Buddy?" John whispered, his voice barely audible. Buddy barked softly in response, his tail thumping against the ground. Tears welled up in John's eyes as he dropped to his knees, his hands trembling as they reached out to touch Buddy's fur. "Buddy," he said again, this time with more certainty, his voice breaking. Emily held her breath, watching the scene unfold. Had John finally remembered? Was this the moment they had all been hoping for? For hours after that first spark of recognition, John sat with Buddy on the porch of the little cottage. His hands moved slowly through the dog's golden fur, the sensation somehow both familiar and distant. Buddy leaned into him, his tail wagging gently, as if reassuring John that he was home. "I don't understand," John murmured, his voice thick with emotion. How long has he been waiting?" Emily sat across from him, her voice soft as she explained. 10 years, John. Buddy's been waiting for you at the train station every single day since you didn't come home." John's breath hitched and he leaned back, pressing his palms into his face. 10 years, he whispered, the weight of those words sinking in. "All that time, and I left him behind." Buddy nudged John's hand with his nose, sensing his distress. He licked John's palm as if to say, "I forgive you. I've always forgiven you." As the hours passed, fragments of John's memory began to surface. The day he first met Buddy, a stray pup shivering in the rain outside his apartment. The way Buddy had transformed his life with his unconditional love and loyalty. Their daily routine of walking to the train station together. Buddy's tail wagging with excitement as John left for work, and his joyful barks when John returned. "I remember now," John said softly, looking down at Buddy. "I remember everything." Emily smiled through tears. "He never stopped waiting for you, John. Even when the seasons changed, when people thought he'd give up, Buddy stayed." But as joy settled in, guilt crept into John's heart. He looked at Buddy with a pained expression. How did he survive? Did he suffer because of me? He asked, his voice shaking. Emily reached out to reassure him. The community looked after him. People brought him food and water, and they told his story. He touched so many lives while he waited for you. He's a hero to everyone who knows him. As word of John and Buddy's reunion spread, the local community rallied around them. The same people who had cared for Buddy over the years came to the cottage to celebrate. They brought treats for Buddy and shared their stories about how his unwavering loyalty had inspired them. A reporter arrived to document the reunion, and soon, Buddy's tale went viral online. Videos and photos of Buddy and John together flooded social media, touching hearts worldwide. People called Buddy the dog who waited and praised his incredible devotion. Despite the celebrations, John couldn't shake the guilt he felt. One evening, as the festivities quieted down, he sat on the porch with Emily. "I don't deserve him," he said, his voice heavy. "I abandoned him, even if it wasn't by choice. He deserved better than waiting all those years." Emily placed a hand on his shoulder. "John, Buddy doesn't see it that way. All he ever wanted was to be with you. And now you're back together. That's what matters." Buddy, as if sensing John's inner turmoil, placed his head on John's lap and looked up at him with those soulful, forgiving eyes. John felt his heart swell with gratitude and love. A week later, as life began to settle, John gathered everyone at the cottage for an announcement. Buddy sat proudly at his feet, wagging his tail as if he knew something exciting was coming. "I've made a decision," John said, his voice steady but emotional. "Buddy has given me so much, more than I could ever repay. I don't want to waste another second without him. So I've decided to sell my home in the city and stay here. I want to give Buddy the peaceful, happy life he deserves." The crowd erupted into cheers and Buddy barked excitedly, jumping up to lick John's face. Emily wiped away a tear, her heart full as she watched the two of them together. For Buddy and John, the years of separation had finally come to an end, and they were ready to start a new chapter together. The morning sunlight bathed the small town in a golden glow as John and Buddy strolled through the gardens surrounding the cottage. John held Buddy's leash loosely, though he hardly needed it. Buddy never strayed far, always keeping close to the man he had waited so long to see again. For the first time in years, John felt a sense of purpose. His decision to stay in the town and start anew wasn't just for himself. It was for Buddy and for the countless animals who needed someone to fight for them. "I've been thinking, Buddy," John said as they walked. "You taught me what loyalty and love mean. Now it's my turn to give back." Buddy wagged his tail, as if he understood every word. John began planning immediately. With the help of Emily, Walter, and Sarah, he worked tirelessly to transform an old and used warehouse on the edge of town into an animal shelter. He named it Buddy's Haven in honor of his faithful companion. The shelter became a beacon of hope for the community. Stray dogs, cats, and even injured birds were brought in, cared for, and found loving homes. John poured his heart into the shelter, and Buddy became its mascot, greeting visitors with his wagging tail and gentle nature. Word of Buddy's story continued to spread, inspiring people far and wide. Families traveled from other towns just to visit Buddy's Haven, often leaving with a new furry friend to call their own. The shelter's success surpassed everyone's expectations, and donations poured in from those who had been touched by Buddy's unwavering loyalty. One evening, as John sat on the porch with Emily, she handed him a manuscript. "I've been writing Buddy's story," she said, smiling. "I want the world to know what he's done. Not just for you, but for all of us." John flipped through the pages, his eyes misting as he read. The manuscript captured every moment. Buddy's wait at the station, the kindness of strangers, and the emotional reunion that brought them back together. Emily's book, The Dog Who Waited, became an instant bestseller. Proceeds from the sales went directly to Buddy's Haven, allowing John to expand the shelter and help even more animals. The book's success also sparked a global movement, encouraging people to adopt and care for animals in need. As the years passed, life in the small town settled into a peaceful rhythm. John and Buddy spent their days together, whether working at the shelter, taking long walks, or simply sitting on the porch, enjoying the quiet moments. One crisp autumn evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, John sat in his favorite chair with Buddy curled up at his feet. He looked down at the golden retriever, his heart full of gratitude. "You know, Buddy," he said softly, running a hand through Buddy's fur, "you didn't just wait for me. You saved me. And because of you, we've been able to save so many others." Buddy lifted his head, his eyes meeting John's, and let out a contented sigh. The bond between them, forged through years of loyalty, love, and hope, was unbreakable. Their story had touched countless lives, reminding the world of the power of devotion and the beauty of second chances. As the stars began to twinkle in the sky, John leaned back in his chair, a sense of peace washing over him. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for certain. Whatever came next, he and Buddy would face it together. And for Buddy, the wait was finally over.